cannot talk with each other during the breaks. There won't be any free lunch today. Everybody has to order his or her own food for lunch today. Unfortunately, we cannot meet in person, but still we want to have an exciting event. And it's especially exciting, and we did not know it before, although we had some feelings about it, that the presidential elections in the United States on Tuesday will have an impact on our conference. It will have an impact on the world. But today we are a little bit tired. We are a little bit sleepy. I think most of us have watched CNN or other networks in the last days and nights. So we have followed closely what's going on, and it's still too early to make a call. It's too close to call, and we don't exactly know who will become the next president of the United States. However, as you probably all know, there are growing chances, increasing chances that the next president of the United States will be Joe Biden, the former vice president of the United States, the candidate of the Democrats. And we will definitely discuss the impacts of this change today. Whether we will face the end of the Trump era today, or maybe the following days, we don't know yet, but it's getting more and more likely. As the CNN anchors every hour emphasize, we need patience, and we should probably even wait for a recount in some states, probably in Georgia, and we might also wait for the decision of the courts, probably that would include the Supreme Court. So the following days will be very exciting for all of us. But let's think about the fact, or maybe it's too early to say the fact, but let's talk about the shift of power in the United States if Biden wins the presidency. So what will be the impacts of this change inside and outside the United States of America? Would it mean, in general, that aggressive nationalism, populism, nativism will be weakened and perhaps even defeated, maybe worldwide? Or it will be too early to proclaim this change today or in the following weeks or months? But let me just mention that certainly there was nothing like a so-called Soros plan, what Viktor Orban argued about in Hungary, how when he and his party misinterpreted and even falsified an article written by George Soros. But there is something what we might call a Biden plan. And I just would like to take your attention what Biden said and wrote a couple of months ago, what he called a Biden plan. And this plan includes such significant ideas that are connected to Europe and maybe more precisely to our regions in Central and Eastern Europe. Biden here in an article speaks about a coalition of democracies and saying that the objective, now I quote him, is to revitalize our national commitment to advancing human rights and democracy around the world. Let me quote him a little bit longer. He wants to organize and host a global summit for democracy to renew the spirit and shared purpose of the nations of the free world. During his first year in office, he wants to bring together the world's democracies to strengthen democratic institutions, confront the challenge of nations that are backsliding, and forge a common agenda to address threats to our common values. Just another quote, because I think this idea of the summit is very important, that he wants to prioritize by galvanizing significant new country commitments in 3 areas: fighting corruption, secondly, defending against authoritarianism, and third, again, advancing human rights in their own nations and abroad. And what is very important for us, think tanks and NGOs, the summit will include civil society organizations from around the world that stand on the front lines in defense of our democracy. Well, this program, or part of the so-called Biden plan, might show that the world will change again in case he would become the next president of the United States. So let's see and wait with patience. And I hope that during this day we will witness some breaking news and we will know relatively confidently who will be the next president of the United States. So finally, we have not given up to discuss all the issues we intended to talk about a year ago. Our speakers will speak about very different segments of the big transformations of our age that we all face during the 20s of the 21st century. And I hope we will all enjoy our conference today. So, following this sort of welcome speech, let me introduce our first speaker, our keynote speaker, who is Karl-Heinz Paqué from Germany. He is the chair of the board of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung für Freiheit, since 2018. And as far as I know, he is still the dean of the Faculty of Economics in Magdeburg, and he was Minister of Finance in Saxony-Anhalt some years ago. He's an economist, but I think he will speak about general trends of our age, how politics, economics, culture have been changed recently, and what we face, hoping for a more liberal era coming in the next decade. So, dear Karl-Heinz Paqué, the floor is yours. You have about 15 minutes, and we are eager to listen to your presentation. Thank you for joining us. Please don't mute yourself anymore, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, István, and thank you for inviting me to present a keynote in this very important meeting. It's too bad that we cannot meet physically, but I think the digital exchange will be fascinating enough on the topics we have on the agenda. Dear friends, dear ladies and gentlemen, exactly 31 years ago, or 31 years ago plus 3 days, on November 9, 1989, there was a soccer match taking place in evening time in Germany, Stuttgart against Bayern Munich. Nobody knows the result anymore. For those for those of you who are interested, it was 3-0 for Stuttgart for once. But the important thing is that during that match, the spectators began to celebrate on the ranks. The word got around that the wall had fallen in Berlin. The wall, this inhuman bulwark against freedom, collapsed exactly that evening. But that night, not only the wall opened, but that night the world opened for a new political program, and it is the program of our generation. I may say this as a 64-year-old man. Freedom in Europe, the unity of Europe, and even more, the unleashing and shaping of globalization. Parallel to the fall of the wall, India and China entered the stage of the world economy. Old alliances broke away, and even war returned as a means of politics. These were the points that drove my generation into politics, and that was the backdrop against which we could and had to make politics. Over the course of the decades, we were amazed to see a tremendous global upturn, the reduction of poverty, and the transformation of the world through the internet and digitalization. Now we live in a moment of time where we have to design the next generation's political program. A new generation enters the stage and takes responsibility. An awful lot is on the agenda and much is at stake. Climate change, trade policy, migration, digitalization, competition with China and the US, shrinking spaces for human rights and our values, the threat to security and prosperity posed by terrorism and political conflicts. So the table is full with huge challenges. Dear friends, we liberals have many good answers and concepts for these challenges. It is important that we work together, especially in Europe, but also in transatlantic relations. By the way, this is and remains true. Whoever will win the White House, although I of course agree with it, is one that there is a good chance. It all looks at this moment as if Joe Biden could make it, and I will come back very briefly at the end what that may mean. No one will raise his or her voice for freedom as vehemently as we do, but we must do it wisely, with an eye for the opportunities offered by innovation, with the will to mobilize the forces of civil society, with due respect for those whom we must first convince, and with empathy for those who go with us on the rough ride towards a liberal society. In particular, we need to overcome cross-generational and cross-cultural barriers in a network of young and old, of experience, knowledge, and creativity. And we need to reach out to allies, old and new. Ladies and gentlemen, historical scholarship and political discourse are familiar with the concept of the hinge year. A hinge year is a year in which a change of times takes place, often starting from one place and over time with effects for the rest of the world. 1989 was obviously a hinge year. The year 2001 can also be regarded as such a year, with its sequence of terrorist acts culminating in the attacks of September 11. Suddenly, state collapse, military intervention, and stabilization of crisis regions were back on the global agenda. Question, of course, is, will 2020 also be a hinge year? We instantly would think of coronavirus and the COVIDian world we now seem to live in. And yes, the virus is an urgent matter, and we need to concentrate a lot of resources on the fight against it. But note, we were confronted with game-changing political challenges and crises before COVID-19, already before COVID-19. Let us not forget this. Firstly, I'm talking about Europe's position in the world between the United States, Russia, and China. Secondly, I'm talking about the danger of Europe's unity at home. And thirdly, I'm talking about the threat to freedom, not only in Europe, but by a whole range of partly new, partly longer known incursions into political reality, as well as into the lives of our citizens. This crisis arc spans from climate change to the migration, to fake news and to disinformation, as well as the loss of trust in institutions that lie beyond our own immediate circle of vision and experience. However, as chairman of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, I would like to confront us with a few questions to highlight these three topics and describe the observations and answers that we as liberals, in the best sense of the word, can make and give. May you also draw from this exercise some ideas for the intellectual design for the panels which follow. Well, firstly, on the position of Europe in the world between the US, Russia, and China. The questions are obvious. How do we, when we look at Russia, how do we secure the freedom of the European Union from its increasingly aggressive neighbor, Russia? Russia, which at the same time still guarantees and supplies a significant part of our energy supply and energy security. And are we really doing justice to the historically much fresher concerns, not to say fears, of the younger EU members from the former Soviet sphere of influence, notably Poland? What does this mean for the European security architecture within the EU and in connection with NATO? Do we have the political and social will to carry more burdens in the future and not only to rely on the Americans, as not only President Trump has been complaining about? As to the US, how do we develop the new transatlantic relationship of the 21st century? In my view, the bridge across the Atlantic to Canada and in particular to the United States, politically, economically, and value-based, is as indispensable today as it was in the whole of the 20th century and the second half of the 20th century in particular. But who has the blueprints for the appropriate renovation of the supporting pillars and connecting pieces? And finally, how do we learn to deal with China without fear and naivety, but at the same time self-confidently and with a sense of the opportunities offered by relations with this huge country? This applies to the fields of economy and trade policy as well as to security, climate policy, and our values, which we want to see protected and preserved. Secondly, let me turn on the unity of Europe at home. How can we avoid divisions in the European Union between North and South, between East and West, between poor and rich, between everywhere, cities and countryside? How could we use the EU conference on the future of Europe to draw strength for common orientation and development from the differences in history and experience of the member states, and to build even better and more efficient common structures and institutions? And as far as Brexit is concerned, how do we Europeans manage to build a solid, secure foundation for our common future with the United Kingdom, despite all the separation that has been decided upon and the welcome of a healthy competition? How do we and our neighbor Great Britain combine our efforts and our massive common interests, especially in question of security, research, civil rights, and the future of the economic system? Let me add personally, it would be a tragedy if Brexit would lead to a deep and bitter split across the channel. We need Britain in all different policy matters that I have mentioned. Third, on the new and old threats to freedom, how do we develop a climate policy that is both effective and compatible with freedom? How do we protect our citizens against terror and violence and preserve our tradition of helping war refugees? How do we translate the will of those who want to make their fortunes for a better life in Europe into a consistent immigration policy without naivety and with benefits for the future prosperity of the European Union? How do we protect the freedom of opinion, ensure a respectful approach in the debate about better political ideas? As please don't forget that at the very beginning of all freedoms, there stands the freedom of opinion and free speech, and this freedom is under siege. Ladies and gentlemen, let me just shortly elaborate on two lines of liberal policymaking which might help forming a strong liberal answer to a lot of the questions that I briefly rose. Number one, let us talk about the economy. It's the economy, stupid. If you think of Clinton's eternal saying in the 1990s. What has always helped Europe overcoming a crisis and rebuilding prosperity, competitiveness, and social cohesion were mainly two things. First, the EU single market, and second, international free trade. Both factors will continue to be of a paramount importance when facing the current corona crisis and the time thereafter. And István said at the beginning that I'm an economist, and I say this in fact, with my professional background, but not only with the professional background as an economist, but also as somebody who is engaged or indirectly engaged in politics and European matters for years. Without preserving and without strengthening the internal market and the global trade order, neither a speedy recovery nor future prosperity will stand a chance. Due to their importance for Europe, both internally and with respect to Europe's standing in the world, there are simply two sides of the same coin that determine Europe's future. On the one hand, the conditions for strengthening the single market and the liberal order are favorable. The internal market and free trade are woven into Europe's genetic code. For centuries by now, at least for decades, European citizens and businesses have succeeded in production and trade both at home and abroad. Today, the EU can take pride in the fact that it is by far the #1 export force in the world, taken together, while the diversity of its corporate landscape is unparalleled in the rest of the world, and its global connections are tried and tested, reaching even to the farthest corners of the globe. Historically speaking, the EU single market is and remains a huge success. When the EU launched a unique project in 1992, it came at a crucial moment in time. After all, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, the launch of the EU's internal market sent a strong signal of hope to the countries of Central and Eastern Europe for the political, social, and economic return to a free Europe. Thus, the European single market has been a beacon of light even before European unity was formally sealed, first in 2004 with the accession to the European Community, and finally with the entry into force of the Lisbon Treaty in 2009 by formally creating the EU. On the other hand, restarting the internal market and the international trade order is now more urgent than ever, but also more difficult than ever. Difficult because the US, a traditional ally and champion of global free trade, is abandoning its support under the current administration. And we shouldn't have illusions. Even when Biden comes to power, the protectionist instincts of the United States will remain present. Difficult, the task is difficult, of course, because of China. With its state capitalism, the new economic heavyweight China is more interested in expanding its own power than maintaining a rule-based trading system among equals. Difficult also because multilateral institutions, we have to admit it, multilateral institutions like the WTO that were created after World War II no longer reflect the power structures of the present. Apart from these external challenges, the support for free trade and the internal market is also coming under pressure from within the EU. While some EU member states are seeking salvation in emphatically national, in some cases even anti-European programs and policies, criticism of globalization and liberalization appears to be en vogue again. At the same time, changes are perceived less as an opportunity and more as a threat. Likewise, megatrends such as climate change and migration flows are unsettling voters and economies across Europe, since political solutions are often only outlined, but their implementation remains diffuse and controversial. Dear friends, what is on the liberal agenda for all these issues? Let me finally conclude with this. Regarding my time frame and with the view to the hot topics of this week, namely the US elections, I will only touch upon 3 points of the trade agenda. First, Europe must take a leading role as an advocate of a rules-based trade system and globalization. Multilateral organizations such as the WTO must continue to play an important role in this. In a world without the WTO, small and developing economies are losing their voice and influence. The EU should start here and form an alliance of the many in order to bring about a comprehensive and successful reform of the WTO. Second, the EU must also be vigilant and act robustly when the circumstances require exactly that. Instruments such as investment screening and protective instruments against overproduction in other markets now belong to the political trade toolbox. Of course, it must be clear that these tools should not be used they should be used prudently and sparingly. Vigilance and robust action should, however, be building blocks of the strategic autonomy and that the EU strives for. In other words, its ability to act independently and effectively. It must be stressed once more that these measures cannot, under no circumstances, become a Trojan horse for a policy of new protectionism. We are not the United States in this respect. We are Europe. Third, globalization and open supply chains remain the stabilizers of EU trade policy. The COVID-19 crisis is not a crisis of globalization, but rather a lack of preparedness for a pandemic. Making the EU more resistant to shocks and crises must therefore go hand in hand with an open resilience strategy. The discussions of this concept will lead to a review and diversification of supply chains. It is clear that cost and efficiency aspects must also be considered in this, while a simple reshoring is not a viable alternative. Any concept for legislation on due diligence throughout the supply chain on human rights must be implemented on the EU level and apply from the beginning to the end of the supply chains. By doing so, European companies should not be disadvantaged vis-à-vis their international competitors. On the contrary, they should be able to prepare themselves for a sustainable future of globalization through resilient value and supply chains. To this end, tailor-made advice on how to implement such diligence processes must be provided to companies. So much for the economy. Now, finally, number 2, I talk of the issues of democracy under the pressure of crisis. Let us come back here to the crisis we live in, COVID-19. The COVID-19 era has put pressure on many democratic tenets. Personal and civil liberties such as freedom of movement, freedom of enterprise, freedom of assembly have been severely restricted. Democratic life has also been curtailed, including through the postponement of elections and suspension of parliamentary work. The hyper-politicization of COVID-19, combined with the devastating consequences of lockout measures, has created a fertile breeding ground for domestic disinformation activities. Elections are being postponed across Europe. Parliament's work has been streamlined, gone online or closed. Some courts only deal with urgent cases. Freedom of assembly has been suspended, and journalists are forced to work from home rather than quizzing and grilling the politicians face to face they are reporting on. As public life is pushed back all over Europe to slow the speed of the virus, worries are on the rise over what extent the measures, if not proportionate, time limited, to what extent these measures can infringe fundamental rights and the rule of law. The countries where these standards have been somewhat violated anyway, Bulgaria, Hungary, Poland, were already exhibiting declines in democracy before the pandemic. You know that better than me, what I'm talking about, dear friends. There is already evidence of a rise in toxic polarization across Europe's societies between those who support restrictive measures against the coronavirus and those who do not believe in the danger of the virus. The first group is upset about the reluctance of the seconds to follow physical distancing orders, while those in the second group see any government regulation on the topic as an unjust infringement of their personal freedom. This potentially explosive cocktail risks undermining a key foundation of democracy: trust and public belief in the legitimacy of government actions. What should we liberals do? Well, here is part of an answer. I'm sure this will be discussed in your panels as well. Democracies must advertise democracy. Without emulating propaganda methods typical of the authoritarian regimes, democracy should support literacy on democratic decision-making on both local and national level, and on the values that guide public service and democratic processes, while strengthening anti-corruption efforts. As the democratic model has long been taken for granted, states should make a greater effort to raise individual awareness of democratic freedoms and civic responsibilities and encourage impactful participation. I may add, as a representative of Friedrich Naumann Foundation for Freedom, we know work exactly at these fronts and all the think tanks that are involved in this conference, of course, as well. However, we have to do more. Difficult as it is, politicians should strive to the extent possible to keep parliaments going after the balance of power has shifted towards the executive as governments scramble to fight the virus. Government responses must be proportionate, necessary, and non-discriminatory. It is also important that societies don't lose critical views and voices on how the governments are acting in the name of the coronavirus. That eventually benefits the governments themselves. We need discussion. Democracy cannot function without free and independent media. In times of crisis, it is more important than ever that journalists can do their job to combat disinformation and ensure pluralism of opinion. Critical voices are enriching. Those who do not want pluralism of opinion want nothing but the totalitarian state. Dear friends, you have a lot of topics to talk about in the following panels, including, of course, what we can expect of, let's assume, Joe Biden. And István, you have at the beginning, I want to close with this, hinted at what grand designs internationally he has in mind. We should remind him of these grand designs. It may become the opening door to some of the challenges that have been described, notably the rebuilding of a multilateral order in terms of trade, in terms of international cooperation, in terms of security, which has been heavily damaged during the Trump era. And of course, the second big expectation we have, which might be even more difficult than the repairing of the international damage, is repairing the deep split in American society. And I think if we liberals, and let me say this at the very end, we have a lot to criticize about the way populist politics, populist discussion goes on in the social media and in practice. But please, let's start with our own failures. And our own failures, please don't forget that, is sometimes a little bit of an arrogance of those nice, urban, well-educated intellectuals in their wonderful bubbles who discuss in meetings and panels like these. This is wonderful. We need these people, but we also need a little bit of modesty on the part of these people, of us, that they don't split society into the intelligent and bright guys and the educated guys and the enlightened guys on the one hand, and the dumb, stupid deplorables, as Hillary Clinton said in the last election, which cost her a lot of votes. So we have to stop to be arrogant, and the others on the other side of the discussion table, they should stop. They should start listening to broader encompassing messages which can save our societies, not only the American ones, but also our European societies from irreparable splits. Thanks very much, István, for not interrupting me, because I massively went over time, but it's such a fascinating event today that I wanted to make a little bit of a more substantial introduction. Thank you very much, István, and thank you all for your patience and listening.
Well, thank you very much, Karl-Heinz, for your keynote speech. It was really exciting and revelating for us, I guess. And first of all, I would react to your very last sentences when you talked about so-called ordinary people. And we will come back to this, the conflict between elites and ordinary people, or the electorate, or the citizens, if you want, and how and why changes, this transformation of politics is happening, whether it's because of elite maneuvers or some political entrepreneurs who mislead the people, or there are deeper reasons why people vote for populists very often, and what lessons should we learn as liberal-minded actors, civil society actors, politicians, experts, etc., from the last couple of years. What went wrong, actually, what you started to talk about. And here, first of all, let me say that please send your questions through the chat button. We will still have some 10 more minutes for discussion. And let me start with two short questions to you, Karl-Heinz. Please try to answer shortly, because I would like to give floor to others as well. First of all, when we talk about lessons to be learned, as an economist, do you think that what is a very negative term today, neoliberalism, was also a reason in the last years how economic crisis, euro crisis, financial crisis has been handled by the elite? Is this claim that neoliberalism was the reason of the shift towards populism? Is it a relevant claim, or liberals or liberal-minded people should use different categories, perhaps not accepting the notion of neoliberalism, but should insist on liberal, market-oriented, social market-oriented views, and should not give up their principles? So that's my first question. My second, what you started to talk about, I have to ask these questions because I'm coming from Hungary, and this is the Hungarian Europe Society's event. All the risks and problems within the European Union, probably caused mostly by populists like Viktor Orbán, and his party and some others you mentioned. What would be the recipe you would suggest how to deal with these problems coming from inside the European Union? You have a couple of minutes to answer. Sorry for the long questions. The floor is yours again, Karl-Heinz.
Well, let me try to be very brief, although these are questions designed for a long lecture. First of all, neoliberalism. I think, academically speaking, the word neoliberalism is vastly misunderstood in the public. I deplore this very much. And as liberals, we should take the time in historical terms, when you think about our own traditions, to correct this misunderstanding. But it's too late to complain in politics. The term is now so spoiled and distorted in the general public that we shouldn't use it. We should, as liberals, speak of liberalism. And this is a broader tradition than what is identified in the distorted interpretation of neoliberalism as a very extremely market-oriented position, which doesn't give a damn for the cohesion and inclusion of society. That is not my understanding of liberalism. We liberals are very much in favor of the market economy, but we are at the same time in favor of equality of opportunity, not necessarily equality of results, but an inclusive, an option, an opportunity for inclusive economic growth. And that goes well beyond the distorted picture of neoliberalism. So let's stick to our the term liberalism, and let's fill it with an idea of what we in Germany call a social market economy, but this term is a typically German one. But the conception, the idea of the market together with a well-defined government framework, a slim state, but also an effective state, which enforces the rule of law and to some extent avoids too much a too wide span of the distribution of income is absolutely compatible with this. Second, now to your second question, which I dare not really, this is much more your business. I'm much less knowledgeable about Hungary, although I have been there a couple of times and I got an honorary degree from the University of Miskolc. But in the last few years have really been concerning in Hungary and Poland and in some other places, because the rule of law and freedom, also freedom of press, freedom of speech, have been massively curtailed. And from the European perspective, I can only say that the rule of law is, of course, absolutely non-negotiable. This is very difficult to transform this principle into actual political practice without making the European Union explode. But I think there are diplomatic and politically smart ways to put pressure on Hungary and Poland to give up encroaching upon the rule of law. On the other hand, I think that the communication between Western European governments and Eastern European governments, which represent somewhat different values in the progressive sense of liberalism, that should be patiently continued. And I remember when in 2015, Chancellor Merkel did not even bother to call up Orban and the heads of Poland, the Czech Republic, and Slovakia, and all the rest of the Central European countries to talk about the refugee policy, which was viewed in the general public much more skeptically in these countries. That was not the way how to keep Europe together. And I think in the early 90s, when in Germany, Helmut Kohl and the liberal Hans-Dietrich Genscher were guiding foreign policy, the communication channels were much better between Central Europe and Western Europe. We have to improve this again. And there we should be very open.
There are two questions, very similar questions I've received, and I try to interpret them very shortly. The questions are about the role of Germany and what you talked about in your keynote speech, not only referring these questions to the last two issues we discussed now, but in general, what would be the role of Germany in this new world and during this changing era of the 20s. And coming back especially to Central and Eastern Europe, another question is about the role of Germany still, or maybe the role of the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, how you think you might support these ideas which are necessary to bring back Central and Eastern Europe to the territories of the rule of law and liberal democracy. And I repeat it as the chairman of the Hungarian Europe Society, this question, which is about sponsorship, support, whether you have any new plans for the next decade.
Well, let me first come to the role of Germany. I think Germany is, of course, an important player and in the European Union, and as it is in terms of population, the largest country, and will remain so for another generation in all likelihood, it has a lot of weight. That's not the only reason for the weight. The second reason is that Germany traditionally is at the crossroads of culture. You are, István, you are sitting in Hungary, and you know that Hungary, Austria, Southeastern Europe have a traditionally strong link to Germany, and of course French, German, the French-German axis is of massive importance, and I could now go on and look at the other Western countries and the Northern countries. I think Germany is the second country after China in the world with the highest number of neighbors. So we are obviously in a multilateral game all the time with a lot of weight. But that does not mean that we use, this does not guarantee that we use the leadership role constructively. And using the leadership role constructively is somewhere sailing between Scylla and Charybdis in classic Greek terms. You know, on the one side is that you throw your weight around and talk of multilateral coordination, but in many respects go alone. This is the case which we liberals very much deplore in energy policy, for instance, in Germany, where there is not much coordination with our neighbors. And I gave the example also of the refugee policy in 2015. That's not the way to deal with the complex diplomatic structure. We have to talk not only to the bigger countries, we have also to talk and keep in persistent coordination with the smaller countries, which has not been done in recent years properly. And we have seen when the COVID-19 package was to be brought on the road, was to be put on the road, we had the frugal four countries get together and forming a kind of coalition, frugal coalition against France and Germany. So we have to be very cautious in coordinating these steps. On a philosophical note, let me say this, I think with Brexit, we unfortunately leave a situation of balance between different liberal ideologies, I may say. You have had the pragmatic British ideology, you know, free trade, economically focused, not too much state, a bit neoliberal. You had the French way of doing liberalism, which is, without using the term, a very much more a variant of liberalism with a much stronger role of the state, a kind of state-focused liberal order. And in Germany, you have the tradition of sticking very rigidly, sometimes too rigidly, to rules and regulations. So that was a mix, a philosophical mix, which was very good and balanced. And that is now biased due to the leaving of Britain leaving us. Very dangerous situation. Now, final word on the Friedrich Naumann Foundation. What can we do? Well, I don't go into specific plans. I just say that we have to continue working and strengthen our work of cooperation, not only with political parties, which is a very difficult thing, especially in Central and Eastern Europe, because the landscape of parties is still very volatile, but even more so with think tanks deeply rooted in society. Well, a bit elitist, this is unavoidable, of course, but think tanks like yours, István, which have a liberal agenda, but which have a high academic and, if you like, scientifically biased way of analyzing society, but at the same time, don't hesitate to go to get out of the bubble and invite those whom we want to convince in the long run. So we have to look at very carefully at the cooperative structures that we have in Central and Eastern Europe. And I think, and I said it in my talk, political education is more important than ever. And I very much deplore that Germany is a little bit unique in having these type of political foundations. I'm not only speaking for the liberal one, which I'm chairing, but also for my friends, the Christian Democratic one, or the Green ones, or the Social Democratic ones, who do good jobs in different countries. The world is, unfortunately, the world does not only consist of liberals, but we also have to respectfully and in a civilized form, carry on with the discussion about the future of our democracies beyond party political borders.
Well, thank you very much, Karl-Heinz. And what you were talking now, what the Germans say, politische Bildung, political education, is certainly missing in many countries, especially in Central Europe, and the support of German foundations, as you said, not only the Naumann Foundation has a very important role in Hungary to create discussions, sometimes dialogues, often monologues, unfortunately, since what I have to add to your idea, it's getting more and more complicated to get into dialogues with others who are on the so-called other side of the political landscape today, when polarization is so sharpened by political entrepreneurs. It's getting harder, but we have to try. I agree with you to get into discussions, debate with not only like-minded people, liberal-minded people, but all sort of people from Hungary and elsewhere. Okay, the floor is yours.
Well, just one addendum. After all, even if it's getting ever more difficult, we liberals are, through our genetic coding, optimists. Otherwise, we wouldn't be liberals. So let's try.
Thank you very much, Karl-Heinz, and please stay with us. As the chairman of the Friedrich Naumann Stiftung, you might check whether your support went to a good initiative, or you should check what we are doing here with our Hungarian Europe Society. So you are our guest. Please stay with us for the day, as long as you are able to join us. Now,
unfortunately, I have to leave you because I have a few other appointments today. I wish you a fertile discussion during the day. And of course, we're going to follow up very carefully what you and others in this liberal circle will be doing in the future. Thank you very much.
You are muted, István.
Okay, sorry for that. So thank you again, Karl-Heinz, for being with us, and I hope to see you soon, maybe early next year again at another event. Now let's move to with our schedule. We are more or less right in time. What I would like to say that after this panel, there will be a lot of opportunities for you all to contribute, not only sending questions through the chat button, but maybe to speak up on your own. Now, the idea is that we will have a couple of speakers, one each will talk 10 minutes, and then only after all of them we will open the discussion, because all these presentations have a logic and they bring together and they make a big picture when we listen to all of them carefully. So if you follow the program, the next speaker will be Šárka Prát, director of the Institute for Politics and Society in Prague. And maybe what I should add, that she's not only the executive director of this institute, but you might know that she is also an elected member of the board of directors of the European Liberal Forum. This is the think tank of the ALDE party at European level, so the liberals in Europe. So we have another liberal speaker as the first one during the next panel. Šárka, the floor is yours. You have more or less 10 minutes to speak about the impact of the current economic transformation on the political systems in Europe. So the floor is yours and you are warmly welcome here.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you for introduction. I will mention it again. My name is Šárka Prát, and I'm the executive director of the Institute for Politics and Society and a newly elected member of the board of the European Liberal Forum. As we have already heard in the keynote speech, I would like to follow up. The world is changing rapidly, and there are many challenges which we are being faced in Europe today, as well as increasing political divides. There are Industry 401, democracy crisis, social division and ethnicity crisis, and most recently, health and safety issues related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Trust in government going forward will be majorly focused on the COVID response, as well as the state of the economy and employment in the next 2-3 years. If the majority of citizens approve retrospectively how their government addressed the pandemic, then their collective trust in government for the immediate future will increase and allow the government to aim for more than they normally could in terms of policy and almost guaranteed re-election. However, the opposite is also a possibility if the general voting population is dissatisfied with the state of affairs post-pandemic. A lack of trust in government translates to the inability of government to be effective, because most, if not all, decisions made will be scrutinized and criticized, leaving the country ruling party open for the potential of being voted out. Both scenarios will affect the style of current political communication, however, one more drastically than another. If people are dissatisfied, then the political landscape is open for populist politician and populist agenda to rise. The populists could point the finger and blame the current establishment for the blunders of the pandemic and point to themselves as the person who can be the savior of the people and be their voice in government. For example, the coronavirus epidemic in the Czech Republic causes polarization, thus a deeper division between supporters of the government and supporters of opposition parties. And the surveys show a rapid decrease in confidence in the Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš and the government as a whole among citizens with a higher income among residents of large municipalities and well-educated people. On the other side, the supporters of the contemporary coalition are more tolerant and see the steps of opposition parties as throwing monkey wrenches into the necessary work of the government. In the partisan system, we see opposition parties forming two main blocks: a liberal alliance of the Pirate Party and mayors of independence, and a much broader coalition of conservative subjects, such as Civic Democracy, Top 09, and the Christian and Democratic Union. So the 2021 Czech legislative election will be a challenge between the ANO movement, which is the strongest party currently, and the Czech Social Democratic Party on one side, and the two coalitions of opposing forces on the other side. If the Czech government or any government can handle the contemporary coronavirus epidemic in a reasonable time period, that can be an advantage. If not, the opposition will benefit from the government not handling the crisis. And another aspect which is important to mention is the future development of Industry 4.0, which is going to have a major and arguably unprecedented political impact. Automatization creates job insecurity as it replaces many unskilled jobs, which will pave the way for a potential populist figure to emerge. As expected, a populist would fear against potential change. For many who would normally sit outside the political sphere of influence in order to sway votes. However, this would also create roadblocks to meaningful change and society-wide embracing of Industry 4.0. Another consequence of automatization would also be the increasing income inequality, which would also play a role in potential mitigation suggestions made like negative income tax. As the inequality grows, the taxing system must evolve and be flexible to keep up with changing times. This growing income inequality, combined with the automatization in many labor-focused fields, would also likely devalue unions as labor itself becomes less valuable and automatization more attractive. Therefore, their collective negotiation abilities will be highly diminished, and the potential introduction of a governmental minimum wage should be considered as a combative measure to maintain labor rights. Another solution to this could be the platform which United States Democratic candidate Andrew Yang adopted in early 2020, where he introduced the idea of basic universal income, as automatization creates more societal wealth and takes over more and more jobs. Thirdly, I would like to mention the future of the EU, which can be in a danger if politicians and bureaucrats are not careful. After December of this year, the UK will have set a precedent of leaving the EU, and how they fare after they've left, including post-COVID, will set an example for other EU member states on how leaving may serve them more than staying. This combined with the fact that membership contributions may be increasing in order to maintain EU projects and general affairs will create more brewing Euroscepticism and could contribute to decrease influence or importance of the EU as an institution. Trust in government ties into this possible political trend, because if Euroscepticism grows in the general population of various member states due to the previously mentioned reasons, there is another likelihood of member states' current governing parties losing power if governments are seen to support of the EU. It could then spell disaster for them on the home front as they face re-election, if their agenda is seen to be more European rather than Hungarian or Czech or French. This is especially true as nationalism and nationalist sentiment has been on the rise in Europe. To sum up, with every rapid advance in technology, governments are pressurized to ensure the right measures to avoid all sorts of crises. A crucial move is to revise the current unemployment benefits to make sure they will provide the jobless with the possibility to hold out income until they re-enter the workforce. In addition, governments must ensure a suitable educational system so that the unemployed don't enter to the market completely inexperienced, as it's sometimes common with the graduates, and that they are given an opportunity to reskill. Governments must make sure their citizens are given the possibility to skill themselves in order to be able to enter the workforce. The new digital era will create new job opportunities and new types of jobs requiring new skills. The current European welfare system might transform to as a different approach is possible with the negative income tax. Finally, there is a big question mark upon the efficiency of the minimum wage and the new possibilities emerging from emphasizing the role of the labor unions. To not just endure, but to profit from this period of rapid transformations, Europe must look to model countries for help finding the right answers. Maintaining a strong diplomatic position globally should also not be underestimated. No matter how ideologically divided in certain areas Europe may be, maintaining our current allies and neutral partnerships is necessary. Working together and building mutual trust is the best way to live through the next decade while profiting the most out of it. Thank you.
Thank you, Šárka. These are very important issues we wanted to cover, what you were just talking about, and not only speaking about theoretical issues, but very concrete problems like the income given or suggested to all citizens and a general income, or the problems of labor and labor unions and trade unions. I think we will come back to you and to your ideas, what you have just raised. But now we will go on with our program, since we have many more speakers, and we will switch a little bit to more political analysis. The first speaker will be Stijn van Kessel, Senior Lecturer in European Politics from the Queen Mary University of London. Now, Stijn joined the university in 2017, but previously he was already a well-known scholar teaching at different university, at Loughborough University, but before that he was also in Germany, in Belgium, and in the Netherlands. So this is a very important topic what we will discuss now, and Stijn will try to show us some slides. We will see whether it's working or not on Zoom, and what I'm doing now, try to get back to my Zoom. Here I am again, and Stijn, the floor is yours, and you also have about 10 minutes. Thank you, Šárka, and we will come back to you very soon. So floor is yours. Please, Stijn, go ahead.
Thank you very much, István, for the kind introduction and the invitation to present my work at this conference. I promised to tell or to speak about the topic of activism around the topic of European integration. So in my recent research, in my ongoing research with various colleagues, we're looking at social movement activism around the topic of European integration. And that entails both Eurosceptic movements, but also pro-European movements or movements anywhere in between. You see a lot of left-wing movements, for instance, who are in principle for Europeanization and for collaboration, but quite skeptical about the EU as it is now. I'm going to try and, oh no, I'm not able to share my screen. I think I'm not quite sure if it says that host disabled participation screen sharing. I'm not quite sure if that could be.
Well, I think that maybe Emma, who is our host today in the morning, Emma might help you, but we will see. Try it, please, and if not, then go ahead without the slides.
I'll just go ahead without the slides. It's fine. I can also do it without. So I'd like to use this opportunity to present the paper that I'm in fact currently writing with one of the collaborators, my main collaborator, Adam Fagan. Together, the paper is called "Defending the Status Quo: The Dilemmas of Pro-European Activism in Germany and the UK." So this paper that I'd like to present focuses on these movements that explicitly defend the EU, or at least the principle of European integration. And we've seen only a few of these movements with such a very explicit pro-European message. And we focus on two, as we say, crucial cases that we've seen emerging both in the UK, the anti-Brexit movement, and in Germany, the Pulse of Europe, which is a movement, a real grassroots movement with a pro-European agenda. There's quite a lot of pro-European interest groups, organizations in Germany, but we argue that Pulse of Europe is the only genuinely grassroots movement, and that is what our research focuses on. So there's been, of course, a lot of, also in this conference, a lot of attention to illiberal forces and populist forces for a good reason, because they have been on the rise. And indeed, I'm a social scientist, so I'm trying to take an objective perspective, but if I take a more normative perspective, of course, this can well be seen as a worrying phenomenon and trend. However, from a more optimistic point of view, a lot of citizens, a majority of the citizens across EU member states are still supporting EU membership, and some of them have now also come out to openly defend the EU, and that sometimes take the form of these grassroots social movement organizations. So we focus in our research on the apparent resurgence of pro-EU politics in the form of social movement organizations, which have previously largely been ignored because there's been so much, you might say, disproportional attention on the search of these populist or illiberal right-wing forces. So that's our empirical contribution. This is a phenomenon that has not often been studied as of yet. There's also a theoretical puzzle. If you want to publish academic research, the editor always pushes you, okay, that's nice, this new novel empirical contribution, but what do you bring to the field of social movement studies? So our puzzle there is, from a theoretical perspective, we focus on the dilemma, and that's sort of more the pessimistic argument that we have pertaining to these movements. And we focus on the dilemma of social movements that try to defend established political institutions. One definition, and this is a bit of a problem because most social movements tend to attack the status quo, or they want social change rather than to defend established institutions like the EU. So Gemsen and Meyer have, for instance, defined a social movement as a sustained and self-conscious challenge to authorities or cultural codes by a field of actors. So it's a self-conscious challenge to authorities rather than a defense of them. So what if social movements are founded to defend long-established political institutions against forces that desire radical change? In this case, you might say these populist right-wing forces, these Eurosceptic forces, are the ones that actually want change, not the social movements that we see emerging against them. So how can these pro-European movements, if they defend the status quo more or less? How can they formulate a so-called optimistic rhetoric of change, which Kempson and Meyer also argue is very important for these movements to be successful? So we asked that with reference to these pro-European social movements in the UK and Germany, and our guiding questions when we analyze them, we look very much at their messages. So we ask, when citizens mobilize for Europe, what do they say to the people they try to convince or to their audience? To what extent do they directly challenge Eurosceptic narratives? And more or less, this is the most important part of the study that we present in this paper. Do they defend the EU in its current form, or do they advocate for a reformed union? So we look at various anti-Brexit organizations that have appeared in Britain. It's quite a fragmented field, which we will argue in a different piece of research is also a bit of a problem for this movement, because the anti-Brexit movement consists of organizations with quite a different message, and that didn't necessarily work in their favor. There's also been quite a lot of discontent towards the end of the pre-Brexit era, and we focus on the pulse of Europe. I'll introduce that movement a little bit later in the presentation. So, as I already said, our analytical approach, we focus very much on the messages of these movements in particular, and we use the concept of framing here, which is an oft-used concept in social movement literature. So we provide an assessment of the framing activities of pro-European social movement organizations. Framing has to do with meaning making or interpreting reality in a certain way. So it can be defined as McAdam et al. Do, as the conscious strategic efforts by groups of people to fashion shared understandings of the world and of themselves that legitimate and motivate collective action. And to be more concrete, we focus on two specific core framing tasks as identified by Snow and Benford, quite famously. We focus on diagnostic frames, which means, okay, what are the problems according to these movements? And also, who is to blame? So are there certain politicians, not only the radical right, but perhaps also mainstream politicians who are to blame for this current wave of Euroscepticism or liberalism? So that's diagnostic frames. What's the problem? We also focus on their prognostic frames, which is more to do with, okay, what solutions do they provide, or what potential ways out of the problems do these movements provide, and what are the strategies to reach them? So how do they try to convince, especially the Eurosceptic segments of the electorate, that support for the EU is good? And this, we argue, is a particular challenge for these pro-European movements. So offering a progressive vision, but one that is not too dissimilar from what currently exists. Again, for social movement organizations, typically they are not organizations that defend the status quo, but these pro-European organizations more or less do. So yeah, this is the main challenge we think to see when we diagnose, or when we look at the discourse of these movements. So our data, I won't bore you too much with this, but we did a lot of interviews in the UK, especially almost 40 activists, and we also did a content analysis of their campaign materials. Also in Germany, I have performed quite a lot of interviews, of which 10 with Pulse of Europe activists, and also participated in some of their events. And I'm still supposed to do a content analysis of campaign materials. So what do we find when we look at the anti-Brexit movement? Well, first, to describe this movement, it's very notable that this movement the grassroots movement only appeared after the referendum vote of 2016. So for the first time, but only after the referendum, we've seen an active grassroots pro-EU movement in the UK. It simply didn't exist before at all. So when we ask the activists in our interviews, also in our survey, it's clear that by far most only became active after the referendum vote was cast. So you might say too little, too late, and that also proves to be the case. Moving to their arguments and frames, so they focus very much in their messages on the tangible advantages of EU membership. So pragmatic arguments against leaving. Same that you saw in the referendum campaign before. So very much economic arguments. It's a bad idea to leave. Hardly, or a reluctance to engage with themes that were very central to the Leave campaign, such as immigration and taking back control. There was a reluctance to go into this. So the main focus was on the pragmatic arguments against leaving rather than positive visions about what the EU offers. I must correct myself, in the fields of immigration, or why immigration or cultural enrichment might be a good thing. And we also argued that there was diagnostic framing. So there was a lot of blame on domestic political elites and also media, who were criticized for untruths, and they shifted for shifting blame on them for domestic problems on the EU. So using the EU as a scapegoat or as a punching bag. But there was the focus was very much on halting Brexit and why Brexit was a bad idea, rather than formulating a clear positive vision about the EU's future. And as I already said, there was a reluctance to challenge and question the main arguments of the Leave campaign, take back control. So the focus was very much on debunking untruths rather than addressing concerns of Eurosceptic citizens. And we argue that the lack of this prognostic framing, a positive vision of the EU, or how to deal or possibly how to reform the EU, can be seen as a weakness of the campaign. If we move to Germany, it's quite a different case because the Pulse of Europe was founded at the end of 2016, so also after Brexit and Trump. But it was mainly a reaction to events abroad rather than the anti-Brexit campaign, which was mainly focused on a domestic issue, really, halting Brexit, rather than any visions or formulating any visions about the European Union. It was also very different from the anti-Brexit movement in the UK, in that the Pulse of Europe openly celebrates European community and identity. So messages are much more idealistic, which can be illustrated by their key slogans for the European Parliament elections of 2000. The years, I'm losing track of time with the COVID crisis, but it was 2017, right? The European Parliament election. Freedom, and togetherness were kind of the key messages of the Pulse of Europe. So much more positive visions and messages about the EU. However, we argue that what the Pulse of Europe shares with the anti-Brexit movement is that they have diagnostic frames. So the focus is very much on stopping the problem of nationalist and anti-liberal and anti-democratic trends. But there's very little prognostic framing. So what are solutions to deal with potential dissatisfaction with the EU, how to reform the EU? In fact, the movement is explicitly non-partisan, or überparteilich, as they call it. So they consciously do not want to become a political party or formulate a political program. They argue it's up to the political parties to come with ways to perhaps increase the democratic nature of the EU. So ultimately, this is what they did in the European Parliament election campaign. So support for all pro-European parties, which were basically all parties apart from the AfD, the Alternative for Germany. So one of their other slogans was, whatever you vote Europe. So again, similar to the UK case, very little prognostic framing or visions about what should change in the EU, even though they were on the whole much more positive about the EU and European integration as a phenomenon. So the key points that we take away from this is that pro-European movements, as I tried to describe, in the UK and Germany have very different outlooks on the EU and European integration. Pro-European movements in the UK should perhaps better be called anti-Brexit movements, because the focus was very much on Brexit as a theme, not at all about things that played in the EU or challenges to the EU. It was very much about halting Brexit, with some reason. Of course, they were fighting this domestic fire, and they basically didn't have the time to think about reforming the EU or pan-European challenges. Pulse of Europe in Germany, of course, there was not this imminent threat of their country leaving the EU. They could focus on more general European themes, if you like, and they were much less afraid to openly celebrate European values and identities. But, and this is the key message of our paper here. So they're different, but they share these key challenges in terms of formulating a diagnostic frame, so problem identifying frames, and striking the balance here in between problematizing the current political situation, because that is what social movements do. They problematize the current political situation, but they, at the same time, they support the established political order. So this is a difficult balancing act, you might say, for these movements. Even more difficult for them is to voice resonant prognostic frames, so visions about the future. So they have to formulate frames that extend beyond the simple defense of the status quo that has been the subject of growing public dissatisfaction. So how do they do that? That is sort of an open question we ask. But from our research of these two movements, we find that it seems indeed the case that they find it very difficult to have either the Pulse of Europe refuses to do it in the first place, but it's also very difficult for these movements to formulate a positive vision about how to reform the EU, especially in the case of the UK, where these movements are very aware of widespread Euroscepticism among the population. So that was my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Stijn. That was great. And I think we will come back to some issues you raised. For me, it's especially interesting when you mentioned that most of these political social movements are non-partisan and they have a special agenda. And this is an issue what we always discuss here in Hungary, maybe in a broader sense, how civil society actors and parties should or should not cooperate, opposition parties and civil society actors, in case they agree in a lot of issues, but they are different, and there is a sort of gap between the two sort of groups or actors in politics. We will come back to you. Thank you very much. We have to go on because time is a little bit tense now. So the next speaker will be Stefan Lewandowski from Britain. He is the chair in cognitive psychology at University of Bristol, and his topic, populism, misinformation, and human cognition, is actually very much linked to the previous presentation. Let me just quote what Professor Lewandowski writes in his CV or introduction on his website. He says, recently I have become interested in how people update their memories if things they believe turn out to be false. This has led me to examine the persistence of misinformation in society and how myth and misinformation can spread. So I think we are all very curious, Steve, to your presentation, how you explain all these proceedings and processes, how we make our perceptions and what's going maybe wrong. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much for joining us. Please, Steve.
Well, thank you for having me. And as you can tell from the background behind me, we just published a handbook that you can find at that link, which summarizes the research on misinformation and in particular how people respond to misinformation. Now, what I want to do in my 10 minutes or so is first talk about the psychology of misinformation. Then I want to place it into the political context of populism. And then I'm going to pivot to what's actually happened during the last 9 months as a result of COVID. So what's the psychology of misinformation? Well, basically, in a nutshell, the problem with misinformation is that it sticks. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that once people are exposed to information, they, number one, tend to believe it. And number two, when they're told it is incorrect, they tend still to act on the initial misinformation. Now, why is that? Well, the reason for the first part, that people believe things when they see it, is because most of the time we should believe what we hear. I mean, we grew up in societies as foragers and hunters and gatherers, where what our neighbors and friends and family told us was mainly true. Lies are rare in day-to-day life. And so it is entirely unsurprising that when you hear something, you first believe it. And that's what people do, even if it is untrue. Now, you might then say, okay, so why is it so difficult to correct things? And the answer for that is that as we acquire information and go through the world, we are building a mental model of the world around us, of a situation that we're in. Now, part of building that internal representation is the need to be coherent and to have a narrative that explains what's going on. Now, the moment somebody tells me, hang on, one of the things you're believing is untrue, then the whole narrative is in trouble. And how am I going to cope with a big gaping hole in something that I thought was a coherent story? So correcting things is very difficult for that simple reason. And that's before we even get into politics. And so what we find in countless studies done over and over again is that if you correct things, people may say, oh yeah, I know, you told me that's false. But 5 seconds later, they're still going to rely on that information. And the reason they do is because they don't have a way to update their narrative. So what do? Well, one solution is to offer a replacement, an alternative explanation that provides people not just with a correction, but also an alternative narrative. So instead of saying, oh, well, this is false, you have to say this is false because in actual fact, what's true is this alternative view of the world. Now, all of this is outlined in the debunking handbook, and I'm just summarizing this briefly to give you a very quick summary of the psychology of misinformation. Now, let me turn to my second point, which is to put all this into context. What is going on right now? Why is misinformation so prevalent? Why are we drowning in this blizzard of fake news? Well, I think what's going on is, first of all, at the production end of the people who produce the misinformation, there has been a shift during the last 10 or 15 years in the type of misinformation that they're pouring upon us. Now, it used to be that politicians have always had trouble with the truth on occasion. You know, it doesn't matter how far back you go. They probably did in the Roman times or Greek times. They had the same problems, I'm sure. But until recently, I would argue that most politicians lied for a reason. I mean, Bill Clinton lied about having sex with his intern. Richard Nixon lied about covering up Watergate. And all of these things were, in a sense, perfectly rational because that was one way they tried to stay out of trouble. And even when it comes to things like the weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, which didn't exist, those deceptions or misstatements or falsehoods nonetheless had a purpose. They had the purpose to convince the public to believe something. Now, does Donald Trump actually want you to believe anything he says? Well, maybe kind of, but I think what Donald Trump and other populists are doing is not to try and convince the public of a different alternative, of a different reality, but to throw out so much misinformation, so much shock and chaos that the public ends up saying, oh, we can't believe anything. No one ever knows what the truth is. I think what's happened is that during the last 5 to 10 years, with populist politicians, we've seen a shift from a contest for reality to the very explicit generation of so much shock and chaos disinformation that the public is confused about everything. And there is quite a bit of evidence for that. And I think if you look at some of Trump's claims that are just completely off the wall and don't seem to serve any apparent purpose, then you can find evidence for that. Now, why then is the public accepting that? I mean, it's one thing for leaders to start lying at 100 miles an hour, but why would the public believe it? Well, it turns out there's some research to suggest that what is happening is that the lies by populist politicians and other demagogues are actually a feature, not a bug. They're actually part of the program of populism, because populism is all about the antagonism between a presumed elite that is all bad and an equally fictional purist people that are all good. Now, to play that game, what you have to do is you have to position yourself as an authentic champion of the people against the elites. How do you do that? Well, just violate everything the elite ever told you. Tell the people that education is bad, that experts are bad. And by the way, I'm lying all the time because I'm telling you by doing that how much I hate the elite, which is telling us not to lie and to be honest. So what's happened, I think, is that lying has become a signal of anti-establishment authenticity. And if you ask Republicans in the United States, 3/4 of them think Donald Trump is honest. Is he? Well, not by any criterion that looks at reality and checks his statements against what's actually true. But if you go by how authentically he is being himself and is opposing the liberals and the establishment, well, yeah, then you can see some honesty there, because he is relentless in how he lies in order to express opposition to, anything he doesn't like. And that makes him very attractive to people. Now, what is it that supports that? Why would people, even if it's authentic and all that, why would they listen to Donald Trump? Well, it turns out there are two conditions under which that is possible. It is, number one, people who feel left behind or left out, or feel that the system isn't working for them. There's experimental research to show that when those conditions are met, people become accepting of lying demagogues. When those conditions are not met, they resent being lied to. So in other words, what is happening is that there is some truth to this talk about people who are disenfranchised by neoliberalism, who are left behind, who feel that their solid foundation of the future has eroded and all that stuff. That's definitely true. What's also true is that people accept lying demagogues if they're privileged to begin with, and they feel under threat by outgroups. And that's where I think we haven't focused on enough. Donald Trump got elected in 2016 by rich white Americans, not by the Rust Belt left behind working class. When I say that, what I mean is that if you look at the breakdown of votes, Trump did the best among wealthy white American males who feel threatened by women, immigrants, multiculturalism, and so on. So you have this confluence of those two specific groups that feel either threatened or disenfranchised, and that is the breeding ground for lying demagogues to find traction. So finally, what can we do about that? Well, that's a very long lecture, and I actually just wrote a report for the European Union. I was first author on that. I'm popping the link in the chat right now in case you're interested. That's a massive document, so it's not something I can talk you through right now, but it does go into the details of how we might cope with this situation. What I want to do now in the remaining few minutes is just very briefly talk about COVID, because COVID is very interesting. It's provided a crisis, a stimulus that exposes weaknesses in societies, and that I think in many societies has led to a complete bifurcation of the public's response. What do I mean by that? Well, on the one hand, it is certainly true that the pandemic has been associated with an infodemic, the famous word, I think, coined by the WHO, that, you know, there's just all this nonsense out there, and conspiracy theories about COVID. That's undoubtedly true, and that is very problematic because belief in conspiracy theories is associated with reduced compliance with public health measures such as wearing masks or social distancing. So that is certainly problematic. But on the other hand, what's also happened at the same time is that COVID has caused a dramatic increase in some countries of trust in experts. In Germany, if you look at the surveys done earlier this year compared to previous years, I think trust in scientists has jumped up by 30% or something, dramatic increases. In the United Kingdom, which famously rejected experts not too long ago, 67% of the people, roughly, earlier this year indicated that they now believe experts a lot more than they did before, because all of a sudden, everybody recognizes that COVID is not going to be managed by populist slogans and hatred of immigrants. You got to do a little better than that if you want to manage COVID. And I think by and large, the public recognizes that. And there has been a slide in support for populists. Wherever you have recent data, you will find they're not doing as well as they did. And I think that is in part due to COVID. Now, the other thing that's happened, and this is particularly interesting in the context of this conference, and I'll pop another link into the chat right now, as a consequence of COVID, trust in the EU has actually increased in EU member states. Because after initially dropping the ball very much, no question, the EU has actually done amazingly well in supporting its member states in response to COVID, and has actually come out of this being far more united than the United States, so-called. I mean, the people, the Eurosceptics who look at the EU, they should sometimes look at the United States and figure out how the states there were going after each other, and Trump was going after Michigan and all that. I mean, there was more chaos in the United States than there was in the seemingly not so stable EU. Well, actually, no, the EU was doing very well, and the public recognizes that. So there's a lot more to say. We'd have to go on for hours, but just to sum up, yes, misinformation is problematic because it sticks in people's heads. Misinformation is particularly pernicious if it turns into a feature rather than a bug, if politicians make a living out of lying because it works. And how can you deal with that? Well, I think COVID in part has dealt with that for us, arguably. But of course, beyond that, what really matters is, and this goes back to the first speaker, what really matters are the economic conditions and societal conditions that create the fertile breeding ground for populism in the first place. If those conditions aren't there, lying demagogues don't go very far. They only succeed under conditions of disenfranchisement, a perception of loss of control, a perception of being left behind. There are many, many indicators that we know about. And unfortunately, those are a consequence of uncontrolled neoliberalism. And so going back to the keynote earlier, I think we have to differentiate what we mean by liberalism from what has happened under neoliberalism, because neoliberalism has led to this mess. And it was preventable, in my view, with better policies, better social policies, no austerity, coping with the global financial crisis better. That would have avoided the crisis we're in right now. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. That was terrific. And I would love to ask you a lot of questions right now, but we should go on, and we will come back to you. For example, I cannot resist to mention this. It's fascinating when you talked about the problem, who is honest and who is lying, and it would be interesting to learn your idea whether populists really believe in their programs and propaganda, or they are just lying. But we will come back to you. This is only one issue we might raise, but we have to go on. And actually, so thank you very much. So actually, the next speaker will go on with very similar problems. Thibaut Mouzergues, if I pronounce your name, Thibaut, correctly, is a political analyst, and he's the author of a book called entitled The Great Class Shift. And he is dealing with also with perceptions of the people, and maybe he will talk much less about the elites. And this is a connection to our previous speaker. Now, Thibaut is in Bratislava, but he is going to speak on his own private capacity as a political analyst. And the title of his presentation is Social Media, Political Attitudes, Tribes in Global and Central European Perspectives. So the floor is yours, Thibaut. Please go ahead.
Thank you. Köszönöm szépen, István. I'm actually thank you very much for actually not disclaiming that I am as requested in at least on paper, that I'm actually program director for the International Republican Institute, which I know the R is not necessarily a very popular letter these days, but I am speaking, as you mentioned, in my personal qualification. Although I wanted also to disclaim, to use that as a disclaimer, so that you guys know where I come from, and maybe you will be able to better counter what I'm about to say using that. So I think I can actually take in from where Stefan left, talking about lies, and my perspective is going to be different. Sometimes I will disagree with Stefan, but I think it is more complementary rather than an opposite answer. Stefan said that talked about lying and misinformation, which is obviously a huge problem in our societies, and that is absolutely right. One little issue is that I think the populists are able to get so many followers, so many people to follow them, because what they say is resonating in these people's minds, because this corresponds to a reality that they are living in their daily lives. And I think part of the problem that we have here is a sort of secession of different parts of society. And I fully agree with Stefan that neoliberalism and the way we have done politics over the past 20 to 30 years has a lot to do with that. The reality of today is that we live in societies that are extremely atomized, and it is to a very large extent this atomization that is leading to the current polarization that we're seeing in our societies. The French political scientist Jérôme Fourquet has talked about an archipelization of French society, which is a society that has been brought in the 19th century as an extremely coherent society, where you had two poles, the Christian pole and the social communist pole, and these two sort of spheres, bipolar spheres in French society have were completely destroyed in the 1980s. And basically what we're left now sociologically is an archipelago of very different communities that are no longer talking to each other. And you can go from the center of Paris and drive about 30 to 40 miles west, and you're going to go through communes or towns that are going to have exactly the same sociological composition. And I'm talking about Paris because I'm a French citizen, but if you do the same exercise going out of Washington, DC, you're going to have exactly the same the same sort of situation, the same people living in the same places and reinforcing their points of view. So this sort of sociological segregation, which you can actually see right now in the results in the US elections, with counties that are some of them are actually 85% Joe Biden, which means that other counties and other areas are voting 70% for Donald Trump. I think it's Wyoming that is voting 70% for Donald Trump. So this segregation is obviously not helping, but I think we need to get back to this reality that we are living in an atomized society, and with people not talking to each other, and that is part of the problem because these people have very, very different experience about reality. If you go to a mining community in the northeast of France and start telling them, as we have as liberals in the past, that globalization is good for them, they will tell you no. Maybe it has been good for you, but it has not been good for me because I've lost my job. My children do not have any future in this community. So you just can't come to me and say that globalization has been good. Maybe in the globally we can say that, it has lifted a lot of people out of poverty. But for these people, what matters is their own little world, their own habitat. And for these people, things have not been going well. And they're not the only ones. And I think part of the reason why we have a crisis of liberal democracy right now is that our societies have hollowed out, and we are finding ourselves in a situation in which there are almost as many losers as winners. And that allows, so almost as many people feel that they have lost out as we have winners. And the two, basically my book, The Great Class Shift, is talking about four social classes that have redefined the political landscape in Europe and the United States. The creative class, which is basically most of us, the provincial middle class, and then the two rebel classes. And those two rebel classes are the ones who have really lost out. We talk a lot about the white working class, what I call the new minority, which is actually the people with the lesser education who have been more vulnerable to losing jobs over the past 20 years, and they're part of the Trump coalition, as Stijn rightly mentioned. But we also have young people, and young people are actually splitting themselves in a very interesting way. More and more, at least in the United States, but more and more in places like France or of other countries, you see more and more young people, people younger than 35 or even more younger than 25. You have a split in education. People who are lesser educated, who do not hold a college degree, basically go to support the far right, and more and more people with a college degree are joining the forces of Senderista Democrats, Corbynistas in the UK, Podemos in Spain. It has been for a while Cinque Stelle in Italy, and you can see that the more these people are in despair, either because of student debt or because basically the austerity measures in the early 2010s have completely blocked their future. Basically, the more despair they are, the more extreme they get, and we end up in a situation in which basically we have almost more people who are against the system because they have lost out from the system than people who are supporting the system. And I think the moment we in the creative class, we in the classes that are doing better, understand that we need to do something about it, and to bring at least some of these people back into the fold, back into the winners side, then we until we get to that point, until we get results in getting people back on track, then we are going to have either very close contests as we have right now, or the possibility that things go the other way. And in the paper, István, that you asked me, I mentioned in the win of Viktor Orban, what I think has been the crucial role of the 2008 crisis, which has all of a sudden wiped out a lot of people's savings in Hungary. The idea, which was that, I mean, we need to put it on ourselves, right? The idea that it would be okay to have your savings or your mortgages in Swiss francs has done a lot of damage, and then basically a lot of damage to actual people. So you know, I think I'm coming from a very different perspective than Stefan, and that's why I wanted to make sure that you knew I'm more from the center right side. But in effect, although I disagree on some visions with Stefan, my conclusion is pretty similar. And I think on the right there is a need, as well as on the left, and on the liberal side, to have a more compassionate view of our political ideologies. And one thing I would like to say is that in the 19th century Britain, Benjamin Disraeli came out with an interesting idea, which was a conservative idea, which was that idea of a one-nation conservatism, because he understood that the masses were getting into politics and would have a say into politics, and that life as usual could not continue for conservatives, and that therefore they needed to have a different agenda and to bring the masses in, to bring the workers in. Now you may disagree with Disraeli's brand of one nation conservatism, but I think this is a process that we need to think about as liberals, and bringing about not a one nation conservatism that we would brand liberal, but bringing about a sort of one nation of one community liberalism is something that we need to do, and we need to think it. And I would say, after what happened over the past few days in America, we need to rethink it, because it's starting to get obvious from exit polls that although the idea of racial equality is something that is extremely important and that needs to be taken into account, what we are seeing right now is that we have, at least from a Republican perspective, record numbers of people from a Republican perspective, again, who have been from the minorities, who have been voting Republican this time. Donald Trump has done better in ethnic and other minorities than any other Republican since Richard Nixon. And I think this is something that I find extremely disturbing, but which has a lot to do with the situation of these people. Apparently, and again, we'll need to dive into the numbers, but apparently a lot of the people stemming from minorities who have voted for Donald Trump are people who do not have a secondary education. And I think bringing these people back into a sort of centrist coalitions and back to liberalism is something that is going to be extremely important in the next few years, particularly if, as now is expected, Joe Biden becomes the president-elect in the next few days, in order to consolidate a coalition against populism. So I think I've gone beyond my time, so I'll leave it there. Thanks very much for your attention.
Well, thanks a lot, Thibaut. That was fascinating again. And in a way, what you said at the end, it's very similar to what Karl-Heinz Paqué said at the beginning, that we need a sort of political dialogue with other segments of the society with very different views. And what you mentioned, atomization and polarization, these phenomena seem to be relatively dangerous for the future if we do not act against these trends. Now, what I would like to suggest, that any of you from the panel wants to react to each other shortly, please do so, because I think there was also a debate or disagreements sometimes between the panelists, and it would be nice to have your views. But on the other hand, I would like to ask everybody in the audience to send me a short message that he or she wants to say anything in the debate, and we will give them the floor, and I don't want to interpret anybody's ideas myself. So any reactions from the panelists? Yes, Stephen, please. I see you. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, you saw my raised hand. I
Yes.
wasn't sure whether you saw that. It's in the participants menu. I thought that was very interesting. And I was sort of waiting for something I could disagree with. And I'm not sure there was anything. So I don't know why you thought that you might disagree with me, because I would pretty much underwrite all of that. You made, well, one point you made at the very end about education, the role of education, and how that makes a huge difference, and we have to consider that. I not only do I agree with that, I would go further than that. I think one of the things that's completely underappreciated is how our society is treating people of lesser cognitive abilities overall. Now, whether we like it or not, you know, we have to recognize that not everybody is equally smart. Some people just aren't. I mean, this may offend some people if I say that, but I can't help but saying it because it's true. And what our society, I think, has done is to create a situation in which there's immense inequality of opportunity, because our society requires a certain level of cognition to be exploited. Now, you know, it starts out with keeping track of PIN numbers and managing websites, managing ATMs, programming your VCR. I mean, these all seem like trivial tasks, but I don't think the collective impact of that is trivial. I think we live in a society where if you're below average intelligence, you're facing challenges that the rest of us possibly cannot imagine. And I don't think anybody is talking about that. I don't think anybody is considering this. And I think it is a deep problem that is only going to get bigger as technology advances. Now, this is maybe controversial. I'm perfectly happy to be criticized for that, but I wanted to put that out there, that we are creating more and more technological sophistication that at some level requires more and more cognitive sophistication to be fully exploited. And if you don't have that, think about how left out you are. And then if there is a president who talks in words of one syllable, that is incredibly attractive. So I think we have to look at that for the future. Now, the final point, just very briefly, if you don't mind, I want to draw attention to a recent book by Anne Applebaum about the decline, whatever she's called it, the decline of democracy or something. It's here somewhere, I can't recall right now. But her point is that a lot of the people who were on the center right in the 90s and 2000s then flipped over into this nationalism and into this populism that engages in conspiracy theories, and where belief in conspiracy theories has become the ticket to power in some countries, which I'm sure you can imagine. I don't want to mention them here. And I think that is, to my mind, is a key problem to understand. Why do people on the center right flip into this? And what can we do to avoid that? Because frankly, I don't see a risk of that happening on the left. I'm fully aware of there being quite a number of exotic people on the left that are not, you know, probably the people we want to talk to. But I don't see them as a threat. I do, however, see center-right people who flip into this nationalist stance. I do think of them as a grave threat. So what do we do about that? Maybe Thibault can respond to that. Sorry, I talked too much.
No, thank you very much, Steve. It's very exciting what Thibault actually in his paper, which will be placed on our website, mentions that we should discuss how much all these changes in attitudes is politically driven by political entrepreneurs, mostly former elite members like Donald Trump and other populists, or is this change mostly because of the people's general attitudes to politics and society and economic trends, and politicians have mostly reacted to these changes, and those who reacted in a more successful way, they have become the new politicians of our era. So it's maybe a chicken egg problem, I don't know, but I think it's important to realize for liberal minded people that maybe it's not only that there are some strange politicians who misuse political reality and use misinformation and disinformation and fake news, but there is a bigger problem. So I'm glad that we are talking about this issue especially. But now I again want to ask the audience if there is any other reaction. And if not, I give back the floor to the panelists. Anybody who would like to react what was told by the other panelists, maybe Stijn or Šárka, you also want to make any comments right now? Not really.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, it's just just one thing, if I may. Yeah.
Yes, please.
This is a bit of it's always a trigger for me because most of my research has been on populism and the concept, and I just want to. There's whole academic discussions about populism and whether this is a threat or perhaps also a corrective to democracy, and I just want to note that, in my view, at least. I think it's necessary to use the concepts a bit carefully, in the sense that populism can be a real signal that that political elites are not being responsive to demands of an important part of the electorate. So I'd always like to be cautious not to confuse populism with demagoguery or the spread of conspiracy theories, because populism, to a certain extent, may be a force for good. Populism is about this distinction between the corrupt elite and the appeal to popular sovereignty. Now, there's a whole debate about whether populists are inherently anti-pluralistic because they treat the people as one monolithic whole. So if driven too far, populism may indeed be a danger to democracy, because it ignores the pluralistic character of society and therefore is inherently illiberal. But it's still a different phenomenon from opportunism or demagoguery or the spread of lies, so to say. So that is something that I'd like to mention if you ask me for a reaction.
Yeah, thank you. It's very important to use a sort of definition that is used in the political science literature about populism, nativism, and so on, that it has nothing to do with demagogy. It's a new phenomenon, which is more what actually Steve also mentioned, to make this sometimes artificial conflict between elites, so-called corrupt elites, and the pure people. So it's a different concept. It's the expression is used in a different way in political science literature than maybe in everyday public discourse when these concepts are somehow mixed up. Any reactions? Maybe Thibault, what I mentioned about the elite-driven political agenda, or is it more a problem which comes from, as you wrote in your paper, bottom up? So how would you react to this problem, which, we want to talk a little bit about what sort of answers we can give in the next decade to these issues. And I'm sure that populism and how people react in our age to political challenges will not disappear just because of the probable victory of Joe Biden.
No, and they're actually probably going to get worse. I mean, I do not necessarily share Stephen's optimism about the future of Europe, although there are reasons to be happy we have avoided catastrophe. But I think we have huge challenges ahead. Because the crisis that is hitting us, but we're not realizing it yet, at least in Europe. But the social crisis that is going to hit in a few months is, if we do it like we did it last time, it is very likely that this will be the end of democracy. I'm seeing already in places like Italy, small shopkeepers, restaurant owners and others, like basically in riot mood, and in France as well, in other places. You can be certain that the social consequences of the crisis are going to be terrible. That allows me to give one answer to Steve's comments about the right. I think, and again, this is my personal opinion. I think one of the issues and one of the things that particularly we liberals, have not taken into account is that, and this goes back to the question of the people, the smart people, the people with cognitive ability, who are very often liberals. We have forgotten that people who may be not as smart as us, but who have other abilities in the care, who are doing the caring sector, in the caring sector, who are doing essential jobs, as we would say, during this COVID crisis. We have forgotten that these people, while they use maybe a bit less their heads, but they use their hearts, and that counts for them probably more than for us. And I mean, this was typical during the Brexit the Brexit debate, where people like us gave out numbers and told people how much poorer they were going to be after Brexit, and people just did not respond to that. And I think people on the right, the Republicans, have been taken over by this wave of nationalism, which was getting people using their heart rather than their head, and the right tried to ride this dragon, and obviously was completely eaten by the dragon in many countries. I still think that people like Mersheimer's criticism of liberalism as having been incapable to rein in such thing as nationalism, which is, or the sense of belonging, which is something that is extremely important to a lot of people, is one of the main failures that explain the current rise of nationalism, and indeed the complete failure of my political family to rein in this movement has been, I mean, it's obviously a big part of the problem we're in now. I still think, however, that there should be a way in which both on left and right, we get to these feelings of identity, not use them, but accept that they're there, that most people cannot live without them, and start rebuilding our communities with a liberal mindset, but taking into account this demand for what I would call a domesticated nationalism. As a pro-European, I would call it European nation building, and American nation building as well. So I still think a sort of civic, the rising of civic nationalism that would be made healthy by a good dose of liberalism is probably a way in which we can solve the problem. But as we've seen, there is also the risk, I would say both on left and on the right and on the left, that this becomes an identity politics that becomes, that basically destroys the country. So I would say, this is the main. I think that is going to be the main issue in the 2020s for politicians like us: how to tame these identity movements into a coherent way that makes liberalism great again.
Thank you. Now I would like to switch to one member of our audience, and then my idea is to give you back shortly the floor to all our panelists, including Šárka, maybe to bring in a sort of Central European perspective to this debate. But first, I would like to ask György Tatar, who is an expert on international violence and how to deal with violence all over globally. So, György, the floor is yours. Please be short because we are running out of time. Please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much. And first of all, I wanted to congratulate you for this event, and I wanted to underline that without COVID and without this online event, probably I would have not been able to listen to these very nice and very useful interventions and contributions, and let me congratulate to that. And I just wanted to underline maybe 2 or 3 things. Firstly, that even if Biden will win, we may not think that this polarization within our societies will be seized. So we need to be prepared for fight within our societies with the populists, who will, in my view, enhance their activities. Therefore, the enhancement of the alliances against them will have to be on our agenda at one point. The second point is that we need also to enhance our fight for the future generation, which is the key. I would say not left or right, but the youth, because this is, as Steve also pointed to the fact that right now we need to focus on the identities, and here we need to fight for the identities of the youth, young people, and in that regard, we need to find the way how to engage them, because the populists have offered to them a very cheap price, actually the price of loyalty for moving forward. In the case, in our case, we offered them to go forward, to make progress if you are according to your merits. And this is the cheap way and the more expensive way. Sorry, I just want to offer into your attention that we need to fight for youth and also for the education. How to do that? I don't know, because the youth, in my view, is rather passive, actually, at least in Hungary, and chooses the way, the loyalty to the power, the cheap way to move forward. Thank you.
Thank you, György. Just a remark that especially to Stijn, who mentioned the old idea that maybe populism is a cure for democracy. Now, certainly in Hungary, most of us don't believe in that anymore when we see it more as a sort of threat, the other concept about populism, although I understand what you are talking about, to bring in many more people into the political system. That sounds great, and maybe that's what populists sometimes do. However, their ideas seem to be relatively dangerous, and especially when we have a populist government in power now for 10 years, the threats are more salient than the idea of curing democracy. That's my short comment, and I want to give you panelists the floor to react to each other and to anything else. I would like to invite especially Šárka to have some comments, to make some comments, maybe from a Central European perspective, and maybe as because she focused mostly on economic issues. And you also mentioned, Šárka, some positive examples. Maybe these should be our way out of the crisis like now. Could you please mention what you were talking about regarding these positive examples and patterns? The floor is yours. Are you still with us?
Yes.
Šárka? Yeah, very nice.
I've noticed that comment regarding from a former MEP, Margarita Starkevič, where she's actually saying that COVID-19 put pressure especially on liberal people as they usually small business owners, and that she's missing social aspects in up to their liberal views. So I was actually thinking about it, that what we did in the Czech Republic was some kind of tax relief for small businesses. And it's not really that difficult to apply for it. And the Czech government also decided to postpone. We had, I don't know if you have it in your country, or in all of the countries, for example, they have it in Croatia, like EET, electronic evidence of sales. And they were asking more and more businesses to have it, and we were supposed to have another wave of it. And also this was one of the what was postponed, so it should help the small businesses to tackle with the current situation. Also, for example, when they have rented or when they are renting some kind of place, it's also relief that they don't have to, in some places, to pay right now, and they will have to pay, let's say, in 6 months. So there are some measures which the government can do, and I think these are actually the liberal ones. The thing is that they are preparing some other changes, but they might actually harm the state budget then in the future, and we can live actually in a debt, or the next generation will just have to deal with what all the possible reliefs they will apply right now.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments from your side, Šárka, regarding in a more broader sense how Central Europe might change? And you mentioned some positive examples, patterns we might follow. You mentioned basic income, for example, as a potential idea. What else, maybe very shortly, what you might emphasize now?
Yeah, basic income, it was like an example from the United States. Here, for example, again, the example from our country, or it can be good for all Europe, we are now using more technology and digitalization, and this definitely should influence the labor market, and not just in a negative way, as I mentioned, like automatization, but also it should also relieve the stress and all the for example, the distance issues, so which should also have the impact globally on the environment. Yeah, because we don't really have to be everywhere on the same time, on the same place, but this could ease the communication, this could have the impact generally on the society, and this should release the stress which we have, or relieve the stress which we have regarding all this. So this is one of the positive impacts which we can actually get from this corona crisis.
Yeah, thank you. I think the debate about populism and the consequences of this polarization was more pessimistic, and your comments are very important, because we need some optimism, and we need to learn how societies and the economic structures are changing, and actually it comes together with political shifts, and we wanted to analyze all these new phenomena all together, and I hope we were more or less successful in the morning. So thanks for your comments, Šárka. And now I ask again the other panelists, any other final comments? If you have, please go ahead, raise your hands or send me a message. Yeah, Stijn, please go ahead.
Hello. Yeah, I'd like to respond to the response about the concept of populism briefly, if I may. So, and my point was not so much that populism may not form a danger because of its inherent, you might say, anti-pluralistic character. My point was more that it's often other concepts that are different from populism, like authoritarianism or nativism, the radical right, which are often confused with the concept of populism. Whereas in fact, when you speak about the danger of the Orban regime, it might be related more to his authoritarianism or his nativism rather than the populist element. And I think it's important to distinguish between these concepts, because populism as such, if combined, as some scholars would say, populism can in fact be a force for good if it's combined with liberal and left-wing ideologies. It can actually be a way to mobilize people for good, for the sake of good for some people. But another aspect I'd like to sort of, I'm being a bit contrarian, right? But I think it's also a bit dangerous to see populist supporters or voters for the radical right as people who don't necessarily vote with their guts instead of their head. As if I may plug some of my other research, we have shown, and other scholars also, that supporters of populist parties, including the radical right, are in fact above average interested in politics. So they're interested, they're also not necessarily less knowledgeable about political affairs. So their vote is not simply a protest vote or an uninformed rejection of the political elites. They vote because they agree with the ideas that are presented by these populist radical right politicians. So identity politics is here to stay and also won't go away with the corona crisis. And we, of course, me included, I dislike the ideas of the populist radical right, but there are a lot of people in society who subscribe to their ideas. So it requires a very serious thought about how to deal with this. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Final remarks? We are running out of time. I don't see anybody who wants to say a final word, so it's okay, because it's 12:05 and we all have to make our lunch before we get back 2 o'clock. I hope most of you will come back. If you have time, it would be great. I know that some of you are not able to join us for the afternoon, but all of you who do, please come back before 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And I think we will have an exciting panel and keynote speech at the beginning by Veronica Angel, and then the panelists will have another, maybe different topics than in the morning. So I think it will be as exciting as it was now. And I would like to thank all the panelists, all the people who were present, and I hope, as I said, you come back in the afternoon. So stay with us. We will know more about the US elections, and I'm sure we will come back to Biden's hopeful victory in the afternoon. So see you all soon again. Very nice meeting you. Come back. See you soon.